Hi, mathletes. Today we're going to graph a third way. We're going to graph in factored form. So make sure you have this sheet out. These notes are coming directly from your note sheet. I've zoomed into the top half of the page, and we're going to talk about what we're looking at here. So today's focus is all about factored form. And you can see right here, this is an example of factored form. You don't really have to acknowledged, I put P and Q in here, but those could be any letters. What we want to recognize here is that what we have in these parentheses, remember if we set this equation equal to 0, we solve by factoring, and that gives us the solutions or the x-intercepts, and that is what you want to put in this box. And that's what we're going to use to graph today, is the x-intercepts is going to be our starting point. The A value is also going to help us. Remember that the A value tells us about the jumps, if we're graphing using jumps. It also tells us the direction of the graph. So it tells us if it opens up or down. Sometimes this is all referred to as our vertical shifts, like what's happening. Is it being stretched up? Is it being squashed down? And this we'll talk about this as we get into our examples. So the axis of symmetry is that line. You remember we have a U-shaped graph, and the axis of symmetry is that line down the middle. We've talked about this a little informally, but today we're going to try to talk about how to use that to find our vertex, and we're going to get that from our x-intercepts. As you can imagine, because everything is symmetric, that the axis of symmetry is halfway between the x-intercepts. It's the midpoint. So we're going to use the midpoint formula that our x is going to equal our p and q, our two intercepts, divided by 2. Basically, it's the midpoint, or we're averaging those. And then the vertex can be found by plugging that value in for x and solving for y. Let's take a look at our first example. So the first thing we're going to do is find the x-intercepts. And remember, that's when y is equal to 0. And if y is equal to 0, and we're written in factored form, then this has to equal 0 or this has to equal 0. So you're going to set each factor equal to 0. And this lets us know that x is equal to -1 or x is equal to 3. And we're going to plot those on our graph. Now, the axis of symmetry is going to be halfway between there. And I'm just going to abbreviate that AOS. Of course, you can look at your graph and look at where the halfway point is. I'm also going to write it out as the average. So -1 plus 3, because sometimes it's not as easy to see if you have fractional values, but hopefully we don't have very many like that. And so -1 plus 3 is 2, divided by 2 is 1. So x equals 1 is our axis of symmetry. And I'm going to sketch that on my graph. Now we want to find where our vertex is, and we know the vertex is somewhere along this line. We can look at the A value. We know that the A value is a +2, so that means it's opening up, and it's going to be a little steeper of a curve. So if it's opening up, we should expect that our vertex is somewhere down here. And to find that, we're going to take this x value, and we're going to plug it into our equation. So you can see that I have put in a 1 in for x in both of these places. And now we just simplify that. 2 times 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 minus 3 is -2. So if we multiply all this together, we get -8 for the y value. So this should make sense that we want to go down to -8 at 1, -8 being our vertex. And that looks like it makes sense for where our x-intercepts are. Now we want to find the y-intercepts. For the y-intercept, x is always 0. So we're going to have 2 times 0 plus 1 times 0 minus 3. So 0 plus 1 is 1, and 0 minus 3 is -3. And if we multiply all this together, we get -6. So the point is 0, -6, and we're going to plot that right here at 0, -6. Now remember, this is symmetric, so I know that I have a point right here that matches that to give us our shape of our graph, and then you're just going to sketch it out. make sure that you're filling in this information in the blanks at the bottom of this graph. So now let's take a look at example 2. So looking here, again, we're going to start with our x-intercepts. We set each of our factors equal to 0, and we find that x is equal to 4 or x is equal to -2, and we're going to plot those on our graph right here, and you can write them in the blanks below. Now we're wanted to do our axis of symmetry, and that is just going to be halfway between. Again, you can count the boxes. You can take 4 plus -2 divided by 2. That's 2 over 2 or 1. So x equals 1 is going to be our axis of symmetry. So let's plot that. And we can see again that our graph is opening up because this is a positive a value, but it's going to be a little flatter because it's 1/2. So we'll still expect our vertex to be somewhere here. To find it, we're going to plug this in for x and solve for y. So we put in that 1 value for our x, and now we're going to simplify. So 1/2 times -3 times 3. 1/2 of -9, I'm just going to leave that as -9/2. That's the same thing as -4.5. So we're going to plot that right here and put that in our blank down below. Now we want to find our x-intercept, which is when x is 0. What is the y value? So we plug that in there, and we get 1/2 times -4 times 2. Which gives us just -4. And so that would be plotted right here. Again, because our graph is symmetric, we know its partner point is right there, and we're going to graph our parabola. Let's move that out a little bit. Looking at example 3 on the back side, we're going to start by finding the x-intercepts again. We're still in factored form. Because the two factors are the same, there is only going to be one x-intercept at 3. This also tells us something. It tells us that the vertex is at 3, 0. And it tells us that the axis of symmetry goes through at x equals 3. Now we need to find the y-intercept, and of course that is when the y value when x is 0. So 0 minus 3 times 0 minus 3, or just -3 times -3, which is 9. So 0, 9, which we plot right here. And of course, it is symmetric, so we know that there is another point right here. We can certainly use our jumps, and we know that the a value is 1 because there's no number in front here. So I can still put these other values in to help me guide my graph a little bit more. Look at our last example. It is also in factored form. The first factor is just this x right here. It's not a binomial, it's just a monomial. We can still find our x-intercepts in the same way. You can take the -2x or just the x, because if you set that equal to 0, it doesn't matter if there's the -2x there or not. X minus 6 equals 0. So our two intercepts are at 0 and 6. To find the axis of symmetry, you can look between those two values or take your 0 plus 6 and divide by 2, and you get 3. Let's sketch that in. Then we'll find our vertex. And so I've just plugged in my 3 for x here and here. To simplify, -2 times 3 times -3 is going to come out to +18. This is going to be off our graph if we go by 1s. So for my y values, I'm going to go by 2s. So my x's are going by 1s, but my y's are going by 2s. And so this right here would be my vertex. Let's fill in our answers down below. So when our x-intercept is 0, 0, that also means our y-intercept is 0, 0. So there are two x-intercepts, x equals 3. And so we have enough information to just sketch our curve through here.